So now we're talking about the media planning and activation piece, which is probably just as important in this new world. I'll just let the panel introduce them quickly, and then we'll jump straight into the discussion.
So hi everyone, my name is Diane. I'm the Global Digital Commerce Media Director for Haleon. I've been in the company for almost a year now, from an FMCG background, and I'm basically leading the strategy for online marketing and anything related to digital commerce.
Hi everyone, I'm Jessica Chapplow, Managing Partner and Head of E-commerce at Reprise. I look after all of the e-commerce, retail media, strategy, activation and consultancy. I've been in e-commerce for about 8 years now, and my specialties are obviously e-commerce, AI and consultancy.
Hi, my name is Kiesse Lamour. I'm Global Head of Media for the Commerce and Technology Division at Wunderman Thompson. I've done various things in media. I've worked in programmatic, paid social, paid search at Google many, many years ago, and I'm here.
Hi everyone, I'm Paul. I lead Uber's ad business in London. I've been at Uber 6 months now, which shows how new our business is. And prior to that, been at various companies, including Amazon and Apple. Nice to be here. All
right, well, let's start with a very general question. So, like, retail media is like literally, retail media / commerce media is like the hottest topic in this space. I want to start with you, Darren, and talk about what's driving adoption and how big is the opportunity? Like, is it, you know, we've had this sort of discussion before the panel, and we all have sort of our own views in 10 first-party data, but give us your perspective on what's driving adoption of retail media / commerce media, if you will.
Me?
Yes, you.
So I think for us as a supplier, there is a real opportunity when there is all those challenges about first-party data and actually having access to them, as been mentioned at the panel just before. We don't, as supplier, not necessarily get access to first-party data, and we don't necessarily get them very well. So it's an opportunity for us to get access to those retailers' data, build relevant audiences, and obviously tailor-made campaigns to deliver the right message to the right shoppers. And there is also the opportunity to track the shoppers from throughout the funnel and understand what our investment is actually delivering from a sales perspective.
Yeah, Jessica.
Yeah, and I think from an agency perspective, like what we're really looking at now is like obviously data plays a massive part, but also it's no surprise that customers don't, see channels, they feel the experiences, and retail media has really presented that opportunity to better align the product SKU level information with the creative, the placements in a much more sophisticated way that we're still even seeing emerge. So it's really exciting to be able to bring those together, not just for the consumers, but also for the clients we work with organizationally, seeing how they're structuring themselves to respond to this. Like, this is the bit that is still very much in motion and fluid, but is the area of massive opportunity.
Yeah, so you were talking about this, it's quite a complex space, to Jessica's point, like you're trying to figure out your way around it, but like from your perspective, why are your brands excited about this?
So I'm going to first answer your question because you did ask how big is the opportunity.
Yeah.
According to Statista, right, global retail media ad spend is going to reach $122 billion this year. And in the UK alone, it's 3.3 billion, growing to double that amount by 2027. And then, from a global perspective, around 68 billion. So the opportunity is big, right? There is no doubt about that. When it comes to the reason for adoption, you have, depending on where you sit, that really differs, right? If you look at the retailer's side, I personally believe, and I know a lot of people hate me when I say that, but it is what it is, that one of the reasons driving adoption for retailers is the lucrative margin that they make out of it, right?
Cha-ching.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Depending on who you speak to, those margins can be situated anywhere between 50 and 70%. And those margins, right, are important because it enables retailers to subsidize other parts of their business. Now, and I think, Amazon is the big daddy in that. Amazon has proven that you can be a mega retailer and you can be a mega media owner, and then, so everybody's flocking to retail media like the messiah. When you talk about advertisers, and I think we had a row of advertisers here, certainly when we're talking with our clients, one of the reasons why they're adopting retail media, despite all the issues surrounding measurement and opacity in data, is that we keep hearing, oh, we're going through the cookieless future and, so on and so forth, the death of, third party, which is your favorite subject, by the way. So
Not after ad networks, obviously. I love an ad network.
But also, so they are looking for deep, first-party, privacy-compliant data from an ad segmentation or audience segmentation point of view, ad targeting and measurement, right? But also, we can't forget the economic upheavals that we've been going through. Every ad dollar is under scrutiny. And retail media is selling us the dream of closed-loop measurement. You spend this amount of money, this is what you're going to get at the back of it. So all of that.
We'll come back to that, Paul. Are you chasing the dollar? Is that what Uber's doing? I mean, it's a fair point that, it's a big lucrative space, but you have to have the credentials, you have to have the first-party data, you have to have the scale to make it work.
Yes, and you also have to have your consumers accepting that it's part of the ecosystem that they're engaging with. And I think, when we think about it from Uber, we have obviously two very distinct businesses, and our Eats business is very much more a traditional retail media environment. But most people go onto that, and we've seen this from research, knowing that they want a delivery, but they have no idea what they want to eat. So therefore, our retail media offering is basically there where brands are pushing their services or their restaurant as a partner for people to click on. And that's I think, a benefit from a consumer, but it works for our partners as well. I think on the other side, what we do in other areas is more about how we can engage with our customers in some other areas on rides, but that's less of a retail media business, more of a brand-based business. But we publicly stated where we want to go with this business. We recognize the value that we can create for the company as a whole, but we also have to recognize how we can use advertising to support our ecosystem, and that's critical.
Where is this budget coming from? It's probably another question just to reel in here, because I'm always confused, right? So everybody talk about retail media. I'm going, where is this magic amount of money coming? Where pot is it coming from? So it's a good question, because is it trade budget that's just shifting across digital? Is it performance display that you can now make work? So Dan, how do you see it within your organization?
That's a tough question.
Yeah, that's why I asked it. I like a good tough question. What time is it? 4:25.
So let's be honest, there isn't a single answer, and one size fits all, depending on the market you're talking to. And there is also a lot of complexity around how we are dealing with the retailers. So obviously there will be a mix of brand budget, a mix of trade investment, but then it will also be influenced on how the relationship with the retailer is made from a P&L perspective. So for example, Amazon, not to name them, like the relationship between commercial and advertising space is very segmented. So you have a bit of discussion, but whatever you're doing on one side is not necessarily impacting the other side. While there is other retailers, where whatever media you're investing from a trade perspective is actually impacting the overall commercial JBP, for example. And therefore, the relationship that you will have in your budget to the retailer will be very different from the source perspective. And it will also depend on the capability of the retailer when it comes to media capabilities. So a brand will never invest in, let's say, on-site search, for example, because it's very much trade and promotion-driven usually. But if the retailer is offering the opportunity to do off-site and to do media which are trying to drive awareness or consideration, then they would potentially shift their budget into that. So it's complex.
Do you have those internal fights about what budgets sit where, or is it a case of what works and what doesn't work?
It's more like case by case of what works and what doesn't work. We're trying to find some models that can be replicated, but so far it's a very blurred line. I'd love as driving the marketing online, having that holistic budget from a retailer perspective, where trade and brand and, digital is all one big budget, but from a P&L perspective, it's not working that way, and it's not that easy. So currently it's still a blurred meets.
Is that a planning nightmare from an agency perspective, Jessica, when you're trying to figure out where the money goes?
Yes, it doesn't need much more than that. I think everyone, Kiesse, would probably agree as well. I think to echo, what you were saying, like, I am one of those annoying people that are fighting for that panacea of just, a single sourcing strategy for that, singular pot. But ultimately, it is completely relative to each organization, and I think even within that kind of brand versus performance distinction, or above the line and below the line budgeting, is like within performance even we see some of that budget reserved for like retailer search on Amazon versus retail media search. And I think what I've now seen in the conversations that are really percolating are around how the definition of retail media and what that means within businesses, and how well that's understood is actually helping inform what the flow of budget looks like. So that's been, I think, a really interesting one for us. We've seen CPG massively as the category where they are making strides definitely to crack it, because they have to. The scale of their organizations and the size of the budgets are too large not to get it right.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's kind of an interesting sort of evolution of the space. If you think Amazon kicked the silos in by having ads on their site, and now because of consumer behavior, we have to follow where people are, and it's almost redefined the media landscape in many ways.
And it's the type of formats as well, right? So if you think about Amazon's advertising revenue, like 70% of that is made up by sponsored search.
Yeah.
So, and sponsored products, so that automatically throws off the budget pacing, because it's like, are you following your competitors or are you following your strategy?
Yeah. Yeah, so are you having the same problems internally?
Which problem?
Trying to figure out where the money goes, basically.
Well, yes and no, because here's the thing. There is a lot of fragmentation and silos when it comes to, retail media. Certainly on the retailer side, the amount of teams that you have to work with, but also on the advertiser side, right? We talk to brands, and we've had cases where two different teams within the same brand would come to us for retail media activation or strategy, right? So, but then also, what I know for a fact is that within different departments in the business, there are budget shifts, right? There are clients that would say, I would like to shift some of my display budget or some of my programmatic budget, some of my Google shopping budget, to retail media. That definitely happens. More difficult to shift the trade budget, because usually they are tied into, JBPs with the retailers. And you have to understand that when it comes to retail media, it's not so much about the media, but the retail. And the relationship between the retailer and the brand is a different dynamic, right? The brand is the supplier and the retailer is the client. So you need to understand those dynamics. So yeah, it's...
Sorry, I think we are just talking about shifting. I think there is also the challenge of the brand team considering retail media as a media that they can leverage, where they still very much feel that retail media is currently something which is very much promotion, pricing driven, very trade oriented, and it's I feel that there is a shift of mindset that needs to be operated to have like that budget potentially shifted into retail media from like more traditional media.
Yeah, Paul, you were talking about some of the brands themselves, CPGs have almost activated sort of like, because consumer behavior, for instance, delivery is huge, right? Yeah. Ordering food on an app, so they've almost had to change the way they buy.
Yes, and we're seeing this quite a lot. You're getting dedicated e-commerce teams or delivery teams in CPG. And to the earlier point, then the question is, how do you link that to the brand activity that goes on? Because sometimes I think some of the customers we talk to, we talk to both teams, and actually the connection isn't there yet. But I think it's becoming important for them to get that connection there, because if you're doing a brand activation and you want to do an e-commerce support activation on a platform like Uber Eats, then how are you going to do that? So I think it's changing. It does. I think the question really is where the budgets come from, because I think we've seen some budgets just created for delivery. So that whole category of last mile delivery has suddenly got its own little budget on top of the shopper budget and the other budgets. And then you're like, okay, wow, that adds a bit of complexity. But I think it's growing pains of this market, and I think we'll get it solved pretty quickly.
Yeah, and also when you spoke about shopper versus creative or whatever, but also if you start looking at retail media holistically, because oftentimes when we talk about retail media in the industry, people are extremely obsessed about digital retail media. But certainly at Wunderman Thompson, we don't define retail media as just digital retail media, right? We look at it holistically. We consider CRM-based activation, so think about e-couponing, samplings, or even offline sampling and coupons. We consider in and out of store. Then you start seeing the complexity of the problem, because there is not only fragmentation and silos in the digital landscape, but then you also have to deal with the whole host of bullshit, offline.
You've led nicely into the next question about the actual fragmentation of the space. We have a huge fragmentation problem, right? Obviously, a lot of people are shoving money into Amazon. Okay, great. Walmart, great. But then all these new sort of retail media networks are popping up, like a Sainsbury's, Ocado, Uber have their own, but they've got scale. But like there is a multitude of new opportunities for buyers. So I'm just interested about you guys and how you approach that from an activation point of view and how you deal with that fragmentation, Diane.
So at Haleon, basically, it's very important for us to understand where and how we want to play. So before falling for the shiny new development and all the sparkles that someone can sell.
You mean like a DSP?
Oh, yeah, I mean about like any TikTok shop that you're going to deliver 50 pounds of sales or something like this. It's really important to understand where actually we can get money back in terms of value and sales. So we've set up earlier this year an investment strategy where we classify the retailers' media based on their capabilities, and then what we want to do with them, our relationship from a commercial perspective as well, in a matrix on whether or not we should invest with them and how we want to invest. And hopefully that is guiding the teams in the local market to make sure that they understood where and how they should be investing. Because my worry is really like to have the local market falling for the new developments that we can see, but then not necessarily stretching the budget too much instead of going for fewer, bigger and better sort of campaigns.
Has AdTech a role to play here, Jessica, in the sense that you have all these choices to buy, but you're limited in resource in terms of the activation and planning piece, right? There's only so many people that can work on this. Do you think that programmatic will solve some of these problems, particularly around sort of activation around PMPs, programmatic guaranteed, allowing you to kind of activate that and then layer data in and make it easy for you to buy Uber or Tesco's or whatever? Do you see that as a solution?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've already seen it extend in like programmatic, like as a kind of precursor to where we're moving towards. And I think if we think about, an unsurprising biddable future, like infused within our retail media activation, like that solves. It's not a silver bullet, but it solves, many of the challenges that we're encountering. And I think that is the element at the moment, that fragmentation. But I think, to Diana's point earlier as well, I think it's about viewing it less as being confined to activation as well, and pulling that conversation far more upstream into the strategic elements of the conversations that we're having with clients. It's no longer just about, here's a brief, let's activate it. It's actually, what does the fair share analysis look like of how we balance our share of voice versus our share of shelf, and how can we select and prioritize from a platform perspective each retailer in a much more nuanced and intentional way. I heard that on the last panel actually, is like being that directional and intentional is ultimately as much an operational and strategic decision as it is a technical one, and that massively plays into the solving the fragmentation.
Yeah.
I'm actually less optimistic than you, because no. I'm gonna explain my point. So when you talk about programmatic and PMPs and programmatic guarantees solving for the fragmentation in retail media, I'm less optimistic. Maybe from to a certain extent from an operational point of view, speed of activation and having access to more optimization tools, yada yada, brilliant. But again, going back to the fact that retail media isn't always just about media, it's about the retail bit, right? The budget that you receive from your brands when it comes to retail media are split by retailers. And in fact, sometimes even at the brand side, the teams there on the client side are structured by retailer, right? So I will have a team that I need to deal that specifically looks after Tesco, Sainsbury's, and Waitrose and Ocado. So if you think about programmatic as a tool that enables you to activate in an undiscriminated manner, that's not going to solve the problem of retail media because that fragmentation is still going to exist, right? And then again, like I think Guy was saying in the previous panel, each retailer has like hundreds of products that you can buy with them. I don't think PMPs and programmatic guarantee is going to solve for the fragmentation of retail media. I think it's a bigger question than that.
What solves the fragmentation problem?
I don't know. I think just all of us retiring.
Is it just? Paul, what's your take on it?
Well, I think there's several things, actually, if you look at it. I think one of the things that there's a complexity which I think many people probably don't realize around product identification or product catalogs. Because when you're talking about anything to do with retail media, ultimately you're linking back to a product. And one of the challenges at the moment is that not everybody uses the same way of describing a product, which makes it super complicated for retail media generally. So there has to be, and I think we're seeing this, an upgrade of almost the back end, first back end, the core part of the retail experience. And once that happens, then I think more standardized platforms and standardized usage becomes easier because you can run across multiple platforms because the same product is identified as the same thing. You know, a can of Coke on one platform is the same as a can of Coke on another platform, which is not the case at the moment in some places. So there's a lot to be done by retailers themselves in terms of improving, or being consistent, I guess, in terms of how they exist in the digital world. And then on top of that, you then have to think about what are the key tech solutions that are going to work for the customers of that. And, you know, there are obviously tech suppliers who work in the retail media space, but there are a lot of them. And I think there's a lot of companies I've seen who've just picked and choosed a variety of different solutions which make it super complicated to buy. And if they're not a big player, they're going to struggle with that.
I mean, I'm like, if you, from outside, it seems like a massive opportunity, right? But when you get into it, it just becomes super complex and the head's just swimming around. And I could just sympathize with brands who are trying to figure this out, and then they've got all these ad tech companies just talking a lot of bullshit basically in front of them. So do you think, but it's true, I mean, like, it's really complex. I mean, it's a super, I've got my own view in it, but I won't go into this panel. It'll take all day to go into it. I'll do a sketch next week. You can see it on ExchangeWire.com. But it feels to me that we're at this inflection point that we need to get standards, right?
Yes.
Standardization is necessary, right? If this is going to be a category that for brands to activate and agencies to activate, and for obviously players like Uber to get spend, there needs to be some sort of standardization. Where do we start on that, Diane? Where would you like to kind of start the standardization? It's a very broad question, but what would you see? What would you see as critical to fixing it? Is it measurement? Is it the information you're getting back to build the attribution models? What would you like to see?
It's a bit of everything. No, joke aside, there is some work going in the background led by ISBA with like different retailers, media agencies, and suppliers, Haleon being one, where we are discussing standardization from a retail media perspective. And the work that they're doing is really making sure that, as just Paul mentioned, when we're discussing about retail media, we all have the same sort of like criteria, and we know that a sponsor products will look like this, or this is DSP offsite, or this is, I mean, whatever media we're talking about, it will be sort of same name around. So it will be easier for us as a brand to make sure we understand where we're investing and what we're choosing. But it's also, as you just mentioned, making sure that we're getting back some sort of like standardized level of information when it comes to data, when it comes to reporting and things like this. It's for us as a brand, we're getting very much challenged in justifying all the investment we're doing from a media investment, obviously. And because they think it's online, we have access to a full panel of data, and we can like justify every penny we are investing, which is obviously not the case. So yeah, we need to make sure that the retailers understand the challenges we're facing and they need to help us answering those questions so we can invest more with them and creating that virtuous circle.
Are you getting the right data back from the retailers? What
No?
Obviously not. What would you like?
Why do you assume that it's obviously not?
I know, but if you hold on, it's a fair point. If you're a Sainsbury's or a Tesco and you want this category to grow, you can't live in the dark. You can't expect for people to spend money and give nothing back because you have to justify that spend.
Listen.
I'm listening.
There still is a lot of opacity when it comes to the data that we get back, right, from the activities that we put out there, especially when you activate managed service programs. Because that is also something that a lot of people don't necessarily realize, is that when we talk about retail media, everybody is, dancing and dandling and thinking it's all jazzy, we all have access to self-serve. Absolutely not. Right?
That's the IO, insertion orders.
What?
Insertion orders, managed service space.
Not necessarily insertion orders, but definitely managed service, right? So, and some of the data that you get for managed service programs can be, pretty shocking, to say the least. So we need, as, agencies and advertisers, not only, data when you are at the planning stage. We need data to be able to do the right targeting. We need data, proper granular reporting, not just an Excel spreadsheet that tells you you've sold X unit and that was the ROAS, right? Because when you go back to retail data and we're talking about deep first-party data, it's about really understanding, consumer behaviors. We need that back to be able to, it's a loop. It has to be a loop. We're not getting that just yet.
Well, you were nodding your head furiously there. You were saying,
Yeah, I think quality data is really important. I think certainly what we're seeing is that I think some clients are beginning to become much more aware of what data they really need to do. Some of them actually didn't have a lot of data, interestingly, because the way they operate outside of the digital world, they get very different types of data sets. So there's a bit of an education as much as there is anything else. But I think transparency in data is important, and also transparency in delivery and how you deliver things. We as a business have to think about which technologies are we going to use so that people can measure us in the same way as they can measure something else. And that's important for us as we build our business. So we will go down the route of what the industry is looking for, I guess.
You want to jump in there, Jessica?
Yeah, and I think we've spoken a bit about, obviously, like the audience and campaign level data, but I also think from a business perspective as well, when we think about the cost of running like retail media and how that's under more scrutiny than ever, there's also a great opportunity to use this, data and have that ability to be really focused with the types of data we're pulling in to build the right business case, particularly when we look at, taking from different disparate areas of business, be that merchandising, trade, shopper, whatever that may be, and actually paint that picture of how we are joining the dots in the right places when we have that level of strategy in place. So I think for me, it's not just about the customer experience and the feedback loop from a campaign level, but also from a business perspective as well, and commercially how we can tell that story.
Okay, we've got 1 minute left, right? I want to leave this stage at one thing about moving the needle for the retail media, commerce media space. So I'll take one takeaway from all of you, and then we'll start with you, and then we'll work our way around. So one takeaway you want to see happen that could actually move the needle in terms of spend, in terms of allocation of budget, and making all the ad tech people in this audience happy.
So from an external point of view, I think standardization will be definitely one. I think from an internal perspective, the adoption of full funnel campaigns and a holistic approach in how we brief agencies for a media plan would really help us to have this holistic point of view and drive the shopper from the awareness to conversion throughout the funnel.
Okay, Jessica?
Yeah, I think for me it's about not just probably not even waiting for the standardization to happen, I'd say, doing that groundwork and putting the elbow grease in now. And that comes from, we spoke about some budgeting, fair share analysis, strategic approaches to that budget setting exercise and level setting. But actually, I think it's also around even like RFIing and scorecarding each of the retail partners. That's something that we've basically built out just to be able to understand from like a JBP level, like servicing level, data level, everything in one like, plan on a page way. And that just gives you that clarity to make the decisions you need to make without having everyone have all the answers for you. And that's why I remain optimistic about it, because I think you can get ahead of it if you position yourselves the right way and have the right frameworks in place to support you.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Simple, less data opacity, and for God's sake, let's break the freaking silos.
I see you're good.
I like the point about silos. That's good. Yeah, I think silo breaking is really important for the growth, because I think it can slow the growth down. Definitely, standardization is another one, and I think a general industry push to get some general standards for everybody, I think, would be helpful. And let's have some more great case studies and demonstration of how effective it really is.
I feel like we need a big whiteboard session. Break it all down.
Big whiteboard session.
Angry sort of trader talk, Kiesse can do the whiteboard while we all sit down, shout at the
You'll be my
whiteboard.
president. I'll be voting for you.
The whiteboards.
We're only a minute over time. It's brilliant. So on that note, thank you guys for a fantastic discussion. Honestly, this is such an interesting space, but massively complex, and people don't really realize that it's not simply just plug a DSP and an SSP in and you'll make money. That is a little horse shit, as we all know. But I want to thank the panelists. Thank you very much. A round of applause, please, for the panelists. Please.